Welcome to Gurukul Live Lectures. In the ongoing series of corporate governance, today we will be talking on shareholder activism, role and implications. Shareholder activism refers to the efforts undertaken by the shareholders to influence a company's behavior or decision making. This involvement can take the various forms, ranging from engaging in dialogue with the management to advocate for the changes in the corporate policies or the strategies, or taking more aggressive actions like proposing a resolution at the shareholder meeting or launching the proxy flights to replace the board members. So, there are some important points which we are going to discuss on the shareholder activism. The first and the foremost is motivation. The shareholder activist typically seek to enhance the shareholder value by advocating for the changes they believe will improve the company's performance or the governance practices. Now, these changes may include increasing the dividend, reducing the executive compensation, advocating for the environmental or social responsibility measures, or pushing for the corporate governance reforms. Now, there are different types of activism which is very important to discuss here. The shareholder activism can be categorized into different types based on the objectives and the strategies employed. Now, some of the common types of activism is engagement. The shareholders engage in constructive dialogue with the company's management and the board members to address the concerns or advocate for the specific changes. There are some proxy contests also. The activists attempt to influence the corporate decision making by proposing their own candidates for the company's board of directors, often in the opposition to the management nominees. The next is your shareholder resolution. The activists propose the resolution at the shareholders meeting to address the specific issues like executive compensation, environmental sustainability, or the corporate governance. The next is your litigation. In some of the cases, the shareholders may resort to a legal action to address the alleged corporate misconduct or the breaches of the fiduciary duty by the company's management or the board. Now, who are the key players is a question mark. The shareholder activist can include the individuals, the institutional investors such as the pension funds, the mutual funds, the hedge funds, or the activist investment firms specializing in the shareholder activism. Now, let us discuss the targets. The activists typically target underperforming companies, the companies with the poor governance practices or those perceived as undervalued. However, even well-performing companies may face activism if the shareholders believe that there are opportunities for any kind of improvement. The shareholder activism has a deep impact and can have a significant consequences for the companies and their stakeholders. So, depending on the effectiveness of the activist efforts, it can lead to the changes in the corporate strategy, management practices, board compensation, or even the sale or the breakup of the company. Now, there are some controversies. The shareholder activism is not without a controversy. The critics argue that the short-term profit motives may drive some activists, potentially undermining the long-term interest of the company and its stakeholders. Additionally, there are some companies which may view the activist investors as a disruptive or a hostile forces. So, undergoing the shareholder activism is very important for the investors, the corporate executives and the other stakeholders, as it can significantly influence the corporate decision making and the shareholders' value. Now, as such, the companies must carefully consider how they engage with the active shareholders, and activist shareholders are very important to address specifically about the concerns in a very constructive manner, because the shareholder activism can take the various forms, each with its own strategies and objectives. So, here are some important types of aspects relating to it. The first and the foremost what we are going to discuss is a proxy. The proxy battles, also known as proxy contest, they occur when the shareholder or a group of shareholders seek to influence the outcome of the corporate decisions by soliciting the proxies and the other shareholders to vote in the favor of their proposals. Now, this often involves proposing the alternative candidates for the company's board of directors, aiming to replace the current board members with the individuals more aligned with their activist objectives. Now, there are certain shareholder resolutions which we are going to discuss because which is now important for the types of shareholder activism, proxy battles, shareholder resolutions and more. So, now we will be discussing about the shareholder resolutions. The shareholder resolutions are the proposals which is submitted by the shareholders for the consideration and vote at a company's annual general meeting or the specific shareholder meetings. Now, these resolutions can cover a wide range of the topics, including the corporate governance practices, executive compensation, environmental sustainability, social responsibility, or a strategic direction. The shareholder resolution may by non-binding advisory or binding depend on the jurisdiction and the company's bylaws. The next is your engagement and the dialogue. Some activists prefer to engage in constructive dialogue with the company's management and the board members to address the concerns or the advocate for the specific changes. Now, this approach involves the direct communication, the meetings, and the negotiations between the shareholder and the company representatives to discuss the issues such as the corporate strategy, the governance practices, financial performance, or the environmental and the social impact. The next is your letter writing campaigns. Now, this is a very important type of activism. The shareholder activist may conduct a letter writing campaigns to express their concerns or the proposal directly to the company management, board members, or the other shareholders. Now, these letters, they often outline the activist arguments and the recommendations for improving the company's performance, governance, and other aspects of its operations. The next is your litigation. Now, in certain cases, the shareholder may resort to a legal action to address the alleged corporate misconduct, breaches of fiduciary conduct, duty, and the violation of the shareholder rights. The litigation can take the various forms, including the class action lawsuits, derivative suits on behalf of the company, or the challenges to the specific corporate actions such as the mergers, acquisitions, or the executive compensation decisions. The next is your public advocacy and the media campaigns. The shareholder activist may leverage the public advocacy and the media campaigns to raise the awareness of their concerns and garner a support from the other shareholders, investors, stakeholders, and the general public. Now, this may involve issuing of the press releases, organizing the protest or the demonstrations, publishing a research report, or using a social media platform to amplify their message and the pressure the company to take a particular action. Now, these are just a few examples of the diverse tactics and the strategies employed by the shareholder activist to influence the corporate decision making and the promoting the changes that they believe will actually enhance the shareholder value or align with their broader social, environmental, or the ethical objectives. Now, each type of activism, it requires a careful planning, coordination, and the execution to achieve its intended goal effectively. Now, the rise of institutional shareholder activism has significantly impacted the corporate governance, investment strategies, and the broader financial landscape. Now, there is a big rise of the institutional shareholder activism and it has a deep impact and the influence. So let us now talk about institutional investors such as the pension funds, the mutual funds, the asset management firms. They have increasingly become active participants in shaping the corporate policies and the decision making. So let us have a very closer look on the impact and the influence of the institutional shareholder activism. Increased scrutiny of the corporate governance. Now, the institutional shareholders, they often play a very critical role in monitoring the corporate governance practices and holding the companies accountable for their actions. They may advocate for the improvement in the board independence, executive compensation practices, transparency, and the risk management to enhance the shareholder values and mitigate the governance related risk. Now let us focus now on environmental, social, and the governance issues. The institutional investors are increasingly integrating the environmental, social, and the governance factors into their investment decisions and the engagement strategies. They may push for a greater corporate disclosure on ESG issues, that is, advocate for the sustainable initiatives and use their voting power to support the shareholder resolutions related to the climate change, diversity and inclusion, the human rights, and other social and environmental concerns. Active ownership and engagement. The institutional shareholders, they often engage in a dialogue with the company's management and the board members to address the concerns, express the expectations, and advocate for the changes that align with their investment objectives and the stewardship responsibilities. Now, this engagement, they may take the various forms, including the meetings with the corporate executives, participation in the shareholder meetings, and the collaboration with their other investors and the stakeholders to amplify their impact. The proxy voting and the shareholder resolution. So, institutional investors will significant voting powers, often holding a large stakes in the numerous companies across the various industries. They may use their voting power to support or oppose the management proposals, the director nominations, executive compensation plans, and the shareholder resolution. So, the proxy advisory firm, they play a very crucial role in providing the recommendations to the institutional investors on voting decisions, influencing the outcome of the shareholder votes. There are some long-term value creation. The institutional shareholder activism is increasingly focused on promoting a long-term value creation and the sustainable business practices. So, instead of pursuing their short-term gains, the institutional investors, they may advocate for a strategic initiatives, capital allocation decisions, and the operational improvement that contribute to the company's long-term growth, profitability, and the resilience in a rapidly changing business environment. The next is your impact on the corporate strategy and the performance. The institutional shareholder activism can have a significant impact on the corporate strategy, performance, and the valuation. The companies that effectively respond to the shareholder concerns and proactively address the governance, the ESG, and the performance issues may enhance their competitiveness, attract the investment, and build the trust with the shareholders and the other stakeholders. Conversely, the companies that ignore or resist the shareholder demands risk facing the reputational damage, shareholder activism campaigns, and the potential legal or the regulatory consequences. So, we can say that the institutional shareholders activism has emerged as a very, very powerful force which is driving the corporate governance reforms, sustainable investment practices, and the responsible business conduct. So, by actively engaging with the companies, exercising their voting rights, and advocating for the changes that align with their interest and the values, the institutional investors are reshaping the corporate landscape and promoting a long-term value creation for the shareholders and the society as a whole. The legal framework surrounding the shareholder activism encompasses a range of rights, responsibilities, and the regulation designed to govern the relationship between the shareholders, companies, and the other stakeholders. So, let's have the key aspects. Now, the first is your shareholder rights. That is, we are talking about now the voting rights. The shareholders typically have a right to vote on the matters like electing the directors, approving the mergers and the acquisitions, amending the corporate bylaws, and ratifying the auditor's appointment. The next is your proxy voting, which also allows the shareholder to cast their votes remotely if they are unable to attend the shareholder meetings in the person. The next is your information rights. The shareholders have a right to access the relevant information about the company, including the financial reports, proxy statements, shareholder meeting agendas, and the other disclosure mandated by the security laws and the regulations. The next is your legal remedies. The shareholders may have some kind of a legal recourse if they believe that their rights have been violated or if they suffer the losses due to the corporate misconduct, breaches of fiduciary duty, or other unlawful actions by company's management or the directors. So, there are some fiduciary duties which we will be discussing now, since we are discussing now the legal framework of the shareholder activism, the rights, responsibilities, and the regulations. So, we will now be discussing about the fiduciary duties of the directors. So, the director duties. The members of the company board of directors, they owe a fiduciary duties, including the duty of care, exercising a reasonable diligence and the prudence in the decision making, and the duty of the loyalty, acting in the best interest of the company and its shareholders. The directors must prioritize the long-term interest of the shareholders over the short-term gains or the personal interest. Now, let's talk about the management duties as far as the legal framework of the shareholder is concerned. The company executives, including the CEO, that is the Chief Executive Officer, and the senior management team, they have a fiduciary duty to act in the company's best interest and to provide the accurate and the timely information to the shareholders and the board of directors. There are some security laws, that is, the shareholder activism is subject to security laws and the regulation enforced by the regulatory bodies like the Security Exchange Commission in the United States and the similar agencies in the other jurisdictions. Now, these laws, they govern the aspects like shareholder disclosure, insider trading, proxy solicitation, and the market manipulation. The next we are going to talk about, as far as the legal framework of the shareholder activism is concerned, is relating to the corporate governance codes. Many countries, they have established the corporate governance code or the guidelines to promote the transparency, accountability, and the integrity in the corporate practices. Now, these codes often include the recommendations for board compensation, executive compensation, risk management, and the shareholder engagement. The shareholder proposals. The regulatory bodies may provide the mechanisms for the shareholders to submit the proposals for the inclusion in the company proxy statements and for consideration at the shareholder meetings. Now, these proposals must comply with the regulatory requirements and may be subject to review by the company and the regulatory authorities. The next is your stakeholder engagement. The shareholder activist, they are often encouraged to engage constructively with the company's management and the other stakeholders to address the concerns, explore the potential solutions, and promote the transparency and the accountability. So, there is a close dialogue between the shareholders and the companies, which can help foster some mutual understanding aspects, identify the areas of improvement, and build a trust between the parties. The next aspect, as far as the legal framework of the shareholder activism is concerned, is the litigation and enforcement. The shareholder activism may sometimes lead to a legal dispute or an enforcement actions if the disagreements arise between a shareholder and the companies, or if the allegations of misconduct or the breaches of fiduciary duties are actually raised. The next is your regulatory authorities. The court and the arbitration bodies may intervene to resolve a dispute, enforce a compliance with the security laws and the regulations, and hold the parties accountable for their actions. So, we can say that overall, the legal framework of the shareholder activism is intended to balance the rights and the interest of the shareholders, companies, and other stakeholders while promoting the transparency, accountability, and a responsible corporate governance. The compliance with the applicable laws, regulations is also very essential for both the shareholders and the companies engaging in the activist activities to ensure that their actions are lawful, they are ethical, and in the best interest of the shareholders and the broader community. So, we can say that the shareholder activism, it plays a very crucial, critical, pivotal, important role in enhancing the accountability, transparency in the corporate governance by empowering the shareholders to hold the company accountable for their actions and decisions. So, basically, the shareholder activism contribute to these objectives, and they are very, very important, like increased oversight and monitoring. The shareholder activist, they serve as a watchdog, monitoring the corporate governance practices and challenging actions that may be detrimental to the shareholders' interest. So, by scrutinizing the executive compensation, the board compensation, the financial reporting, and the other governance related issues, the activists help identify the areas where the companies may need to improve the transparency and the accountability. The next is your alignment of interest. The shareholder activism, it promotes the alignment of interest between the company's management, the board of directors, and the shareholders. The activists often advocate for the governance reforms and the practices that prioritize the long-term value creation, the risk management, and the stakeholder interest over the short-term profits or the personal agendas. So, this alignment, it fosters a culture of accountability and the responsible decision making throughout the organization. The next is your disclosure and reporting requirements. The shareholder activism encourages the companies to enhance the disclosure and the reporting practices to promote the shareholders with timely, accurate, comprehensive information about the corporate performance, risk, and the governance matters. So, that is how we talk about the disclosure and the reporting practices. So, this is important to discuss that transparency in the financial reporting, executive compensation, and the related party transactions and other areas, they really help building the trust, confidence among the shareholders and the different stakeholders. Thank you so much.